I remember the early years of my marriage as if they were yesterday. The cramped apartment, the late nights working overtime, the constant juggling of bills and priorities. My wife, Sarah, was always by my side, her smile a constant source of motivation. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that felt like enough. The dreams we had were simple good jobs, a house of our own, a stable future for our children. But dreams aren't built on hope alone, they're built on sacrifice. And as the years passed, I found myself giving more and more of myself to ensure those dreams became a reality. I worked long hours, took on side jobs, all while Sarah took care of the kids, managing the household. Together, we made it work, but somewhere along the way, I started to lose myself. My ambitions, my hobbies, the things that once defined me outside of work and family, they slipped away. I didn't mind. I told myself it was temporary. That one day, when the kids were older, when Sarah didn't need me to carry every burden, I'd find time for myself again. I lived for the future. I lived for the moment when I could look at my family and say, we made it. But as I built this life, something changed. The balance of sacrifice began to shift. It was subtle at first. Sarah started working more hours. The kids grew up, became more independent, and seemed less reliant on me for guidance. I didn't mind at first. After all, I'd put in the work. They deserved their own lives, their own pursuits. But then, something else started to happen. The more I gave, the less I seemed to receive. Sarah was becoming more distant, more focused on her career and her own ambitions. The kids, well, they weren't kids anymore. They had their own lives, their own interests. And I was left to watch from the sidelines, feeling more like a spectator in my own life than a participant. It wasn't that they didn't appreciate me. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. They loved me, I told myself. But love isn't enough when it's not matched by respect, by recognition. I was working harder than ever, giving more than I ever had. But I started to feel invisible. The final blow came on a Saturday morning. I'd been up late the night before, working on a project I'd taken on to earn a little extra money. I was hoping it would give me the breathing room I needed to take care of a few overdue things around the house. When I walked into the living room, I found Sarah and our son, Ryan, sitting together, laughing at something on her phone. "Hey, I'm home," I said, my voice light, hoping to join in. But Sarah didn't look up. Ryan did, and for a split second, I saw something in his eyes, a look that made me feel like a stranger. He quickly averted his gaze. "Morning, Dad," he muttered, then went back to his phone. I stood there, feeling the weight of their indifference settle over me like a fog. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, nothing," Sarah said, finally glancing up. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just catching up." I sat down, trying to mask the unease building in my chest. I had spent my entire life putting them first, sacrificing everything for them, and now I felt like I was being slowly shut out. "We're just talking about a project I've been working on," Sarah continued. "I've been asked to manage a new initiative at work. It's a big opportunity. Ryan and I were just discussing it. A big opportunity." I could feel the distance between us widening. It was always something else, her work, her ambitions, her plans. And where was I in all of this? A silent observer. "I see," I said quietly, my hands clenched in my lap. "So, what about the things we've been talking about? The stuff I've been working on?" Sarah gave a small laugh, almost dismissive. "We'll get to it, Tom. You know how at Island I'm just trying to keep things moving forward." I nodded, though I could feel the sting of her words. Moving forward. Always moving forward without me. The silence that followed was thick. It wasn't the comfortable kind of silence we used to share, the kind where you could just be in each other's presence without needing words. No, this was the silence of two people who had drifted too far apart to find their way back. I thought about everything I had done, everything I had given up for this family. The nights spent working 2 jobs, the weekends I missed, the years of my life that I had put on hold so they could chase their dreams. And now, here I was, invisible, irrelevant. That night, I stayed in the garage, working on a project I had no real interest in. I needed something to occupy my mind, something to drown out the thoughts that were crowding in. I could hear Sarah and the kids inside, laughing, talking. I didn't join them. I didn't know how. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of the doorbell. When I opened the door, there was a man standing on the other side, holding a letter. "Is this Tom Reed?" he asked. I nodded, still groggy from sleep. "This is for you." The man handed me the letter, then turned and walked back to his car without another word. I closed the door behind me and opened the letter. My heart sank as I read the contents. "Dear Mr. Reed, we regret to inform you that your application for a loan has been denied. After careful consideration, we have determined that your creditworthiness does not meet the requirements for approval. If you have any questions, please contact us directly." I stared at the letter in disbelief. My loan application had been rejected. The one thing that could have given me the financial cushion to start again, to build something for myself, had been denied. I walked to the living room, holding the letter in my hands. Sarah looked up from the couch, eyes narrowing when she saw my expression. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice tinged with irritation. I showed her the letter. "I've been denied the loan." She took the letter, read it, and then handed it back to me without a word. "Do you want me to help?" she asked, almost as if it were an afterthought. I stared at her for a moment, the weight of everything we hadn't said hanging between us. "Help?" I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "I've been helping you for 20 years, Sarah. I've sacrificed everything, and now you can't even offer me the decency of support." Her face tightened, her jaw clenching. "Don't act like I haven't given you everything I could." I shook my head, anger building in my chest. "Everything? You think I've been asking for everything? All I ever asked for was the chance to be part of this family, to be seen. But you're too busy chasing your own dreams to see what's right in front of you." Her eyes flashed with something sharp. "I'm not the one who's been dragging my feet, Tom. I've been working hard to make a life for us. You can't even see that, can you?" I stood there, the gap between us widening with each word, the weight of years of sacrifice, of love, of loyalty. It all came crashing down in that moment. And as I looked at her, I realized something that shattered the last illusion I had. This wasn't a partnership anymore. I had given everything, and all I had gotten in return was indifference. I left the house, walking out into the cold morning air. The world was still waking up, and I felt like I was the only one awake to the truth. I had been a fool to think I could keep giving, and never ask for anything in return. The truth was simple. They had all moved on without me. Sarah, the kids, even the people I had worked with for years, they had all grown and changed, and I was still stuck, caught in the echo of a life that had passed me by. But that was about to change. The family I had sacrificed for had turned their backs on me when I needed them most. And in that moment, I realized something else. The greatest sacrifice wasn't the one I made for them. It was the one I had yet to make for myself. The silence that followed Sarah's departure was almost deafening. I had spent 20 years giving her everything. My love, my loyalty, my time, and now, standing alone in our empty house, I felt like I had been stripped of every ounce of dignity I once had. She left with Richard, her CEO, a man who wore suits too expensive for my taste, a man who had the power to offer her the life she thought she deserved. I had always believed that love could hold us together, that no material possession could replace what we had built. But that belief was shattered the moment she walked out the door. I tried to ignore the constant reminder that I had failed. Every part of the house screamed her absence, the empty chair where she used to sit at the dinner table, the silence in the rooms that had once echoed with laughter, the scent of her perfume that still lingered in the hallway. I spent hours at my desk, staring at the same files, unable to focus. My world, the life I had worked so hard to create, was suddenly a shell of what it had been. The phone calls started soon after, some from friends, others from family, all asking the same question: "Are you okay?" The truth was, I didn't know. I wasn't okay. I was broken, but I couldn't tell them that. I had always been the strong one, the dependable one. Now, I was the one left behind, abandoned by the very people I had sacrificed everything for. I tried to focus on work, but Richard, the man who had taken everything from me, was always in the background. His name was everywhere I went, in every conversation. I couldn't escape him. It seemed like the world had forgotten me and was now revolving around him. He had the power, the wealth, and the respect that I had spent my entire life working toward. And now, in my brokenness, I was invisible. One evening, as I sat in the dim light of my office, a notification popped up on my phone. It was an email from Sarah, the first time I'd heard from her since she left. My heart raced as I opened it, hoping for some kind of explanation, some kind of apology. But instead, it was a simple message, cold and detached. "I'm sorry, Tom. I can't keep pretending. Richard makes me feel seen in a way you never could. I hope you understand. Take care of yourself." I stared at the screen, the words blurring as my eyes filled with tears. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't sorry for leaving me, for choosing him over me, for breaking everything we had. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't fully accepted before. She had never truly seen me. She had seen what she wanted to see, the person who worked tirelessly to provide for her, the man who was always there when she needed him. But she hadn't seen the man I was, the man who had sacrificed everything for her, for us, for a life we were supposed to share. The email wasn't just an apology. It was an obituary for our marriage. And I knew, deep down, that I couldn't chase after her anymore. She had made her choice, but I didn't have to stay in the ruins of what was left behind. I had given everything for her, but I had neglected myself in the process. Now, it was time to rebuild. The next morning, I woke up with a new sense of clarity. I couldn't keep wallowing in self-pity. I couldn't keep letting her betrayal define me. I needed to find my strength again, to remember who I was before I became the man she wanted me to be. I was David Sanders, the man who had once dreamed of building a life, not just for his family, but for himself. I had put that man on hold for too long. I started small. I went to the gym for the first time in years. I hadn't worked out since before the kids were born, but I needed to feel like I was in control of something again. The weight felt heavy on my shoulders, but with each rep, I began to feel a little stronger, a little more like the person I had been. When I got home, I didn't just sit around. I went through my old files, found the business plans I had once dreamed of pursuing. I hadn't looked at them in years, too busy being the husband, the father, the provider. But now, I realized, it was time for me, time to build something for myself, something that wasn't tied to anyone else's expectations. I dusted off old contacts, called in favors, and reached out to a few investors I had met over the years. I wasn't sure what would come of it, but I knew I had to try. I had something to prove, not just to Sarah, not just to Richard, but to myself. I could rise again. Weeks passed, and the process was slow, frustrating at times. But with each passing day, I felt a little more like myself. I met with investors, worked late into the night, developed my ideas. Slowly, the pieces started falling into place. I could see the beginnings of something that was mine, something that was going to be successful. The phone calls from Sarah kept coming, but they grew increasingly distant. Her voice was strained, apologetic, as if she couldn't quite figure out what she wanted. She wanted to talk about the kids, about the house, but whenever she mentioned Richard, I could hear the undercurrent of guilt in her voice. It wasn't the kind of apology I needed. And then, one evening, I ran into her. It was at a local restaurant. I was there for a business dinner, meeting with an investor, when I looked up and saw her standing by the door. Richard wasn't with her. She was alone. Her eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of regret in them. "Tom," she said softly, walking over. "I didn't expect to see you here." I stood up, my mind racing, my emotions in a turmoil I hadn't felt in months. I had imagined this moment, but now that it was real, I didn't know what to say. "Are you happy?" I asked, my voice calm but my heart pounding. "Is this the life you wanted?" She hesitated, her gaze dropping. "I don't know anymore. Richard's everything I thought I wanted, but..." She trailed off, her voice cracking. "I've lost you, Tom, and I don't know if I can ever get you back." I looked at her, the woman I had once built my world around, and I felt nothing but emptiness. She had chosen him, and now, here she was, seeking something from me that she had forfeited. I shook my head. "You had a chance to keep what we had, Anna, but you made your choice. Now I'm making mine." I turned and walked away. That night, I lay in bed with the silence echoing in the room. Sarah's departure hadn't been the end. It had been the beginning of something new, something stronger, something I hadn't allowed myself to become for years. And when I closed my eyes, for the first time since she left, I felt peace. I had found my strength again. I had learned to stand on my own, to rebuild from nothing. And when I opened my eyes in the morning, I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer the man who had sacrificed everything for someone else. I was a man who had found his own purpose, and no one could take that away. The days after that encounter with Anna felt like a turning point. I had spent so long holding on to what was lost, so much energy directed toward a past that no longer existed. But now, I realized something I had overlooked for years. I was not just a victim of her betrayal. I was a man with a future that was still mine to shape, still mine to build. It wasn't easy. The weight of the past still lingered in every corner of the house, every photo of us together, every piece of furniture she had picked out with such care. But every morning when I woke, I told myself, today is the day I build something new. The first step was a phone call to Martin. He had been the only one to stand by me when everything had fallen apart, and now, more than ever, I needed him. "Martin," I said when he picked up, "it's time." He didn't ask questions. He knew what I meant. "I'm in," he said, his voice steady. "What's the plan?" I laid it out for him, the business I had been slowly building, the idea that had taken shape in the quiet hours when I had no distractions, when I could think about what I really wanted. The startup I had been working on wasn't just a way to make money. It was a way to prove to myself that I wasn't just a man who lost everything, but a man who could rebuild from the ashes. Martin was on board immediately, his enthusiasm as infectious as it had always been. We had spent years working in the trenches together, and now, we were going to build something that would make Lane's empire look like a house of cards. But it wasn't just about the business. It was about showing the world not just Anna, not just Richard, but everyone who had doubted me that I was more than just the man who had been left behind. I was a man who could rise higher than they ever imagined. The next few months were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and sleepless nights. But this time, the work felt different. It wasn't a burden, it was a purpose. I was doing it for myself. I started reaching out to investors, starting small, but getting bigger with each conversation. My credibility was hard-earned, but it wasn't something I was willing to let slip away. I had seen firsthand the rot that Richard Lane's empire had been built on, and I was determined to build mine on something solid. I had the vision, the expertise, and the drive. All I needed was the chance. It didn't take long before the first investor came on board, then a second, then a third. Each of them saw the same thing I had seen: a company built on integrity, a company that valued hard work over shortcuts. And when I pitched my idea to them, they saw potential, more than potential. They saw the future. Then came the pivotal moment, the board meeting. It had been arranged quietly, with minimal fanfare. Richard had no idea that his own downfall was already in motion. When I walked into the conference room, I was no longer the man who had been cast aside. I was a leader. The investors who had come to listen weren't there for empty promises or flashy presentations. They were there because they believed in the foundation I was building. They saw what I had done with the little I had. They saw the value of hard work and honesty. Richard had once thought he could destroy me with a few words. He had laughed at my expense, mocked me in front of everyone, thinking that humiliation would be enough to keep me down. But as I stood there, presenting my vision for the future, it was clear that it wasn't just business I was taking from him. It was respect. Richard was trying to hold on to what he had built, but the walls were crumbling. The board saw it, the investors saw it, and they saw me, standing tall, steady, ready to take the reins. At the end of the meeting, one of the investors, a man with a reputation for making big moves, leaned across the table and said, "Thomas, I like what I see. We're in. Let's talk numbers." That was all I needed. The next few months were a whirlwind. The company took off faster than I had anticipated, and I began to see the fruits of my labor. The work was hard, harder than I had imagined, but it was fulfilling in a way that nothing had been before. I was building something that would last. Not just a business, but a legacy. But there was still one thing hanging over me: Anna. I had thought that once I built something, once I proved to myself that I could rise higher than Richard and her, I would be able to let her go. But I hadn't. The truth was, her absence still felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. One evening, I sat alone in my office, watching the sunset from the window. The building I now owned felt different, solid, secure, but as the sky turned pink and gold, I couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness. My phone buzzed on the desk. I didn't look at it. I knew who it was: Anna. She had called a few times, texted, but I hadn't responded. What was there to say? But this time, the message was different. "Thomas, can we talk?" I know I don't deserve a chance, but I need you to know that I was wrong. I made a mistake. I lost everything, and now I see how much you gave me. Please, let me explain." I stared at the screen. The woman who had walked out on me. The woman who had chosen Richard over me. The woman who had torn my life apart. And now she wanted to explain. I sat back in my chair, closing my eyes. I had spent so much time chasing after her, trying to understand why she had left, why she had chosen him. But in that moment, I realized something. I didn't need her explanation. I didn't need her validation. I had built this life for me. I had risen from the ashes of my own destruction, and I didn't need her to be a part of it anymore. The next day, I met with my team to discuss the next phase of our project. The future was bright. I had everything I needed: respect, success, a foundation that would last. As we talked strategy and goals, I couldn't help but smile to myself. I had done it. I had rebuilt my life from nothing. And no one, least of all Anna, could take that away from me. The city looked different from my office, the skyline sharper, the streets cleaner, as if I was finally standing at the top of a mountain I had spent years climbing. I leaned back in my chair, watching the sunset turn the horizon into a canvas of fiery orange and deep red. This was my moment. This was the culmination of everything I had fought for. And yet, as I looked out the window, I couldn't shake the thought that something was missing. Richard Lane had been the man who destroyed me, who humiliated me in front of my colleagues, who took my wife and made me feel like nothing. I had built something new, something better, something that not only proved my worth but surpassed everything he had ever achieved. Yet, as much as I had wanted to take him down, as much as I had wanted to show the world I was more than just the man left behind, I realized that his defeat no longer filled the hole inside me. The truth was, I had moved on, not just from Anna but from everything that had once defined me. My past, my failures, my heartbreak, they no longer had control over me. The company I now led was mine, built on my terms, and it was thriving. But there was one thing left. One final loose end that I couldn't ignore. I didn't hear from Anna for a few weeks after the last message she had sent. I tried to bury the thought of her, telling myself that I had no reason to respond, that she didn't deserve my attention after everything she had done. But the nagging thought persisted. What if she was right? What if, in some strange way, she had learned from her mistakes? What if she had finally realized the value of what she had lost? I had spent so many years trying to understand her, to fix the pieces of our relationship. But now, it wasn't about her. It wasn't about proving anything to her. It was about proving it to myself. And the hardest part of that was knowing that I had been willing to sacrifice everything: my family, my time, my dreams, for someone who could walk away from it all without a second thought. Still, I knew I couldn't keep ignoring her forever. There was unfinished business, a conversation I needed to have, not just with her, but with myself. The day I agreed to meet Anna, I wasn't expecting any grand resolution. I didn't expect forgiveness, nor did I expect her to beg for my return, but I needed to hear her out. She chose the same cafe where we had shared our first date, and where, years ago, I had looked at her and imagined a future filled with promise. Now, walking in, the place seemed smaller, quieter. Anna was already sitting at a table by the window, her eyes scanning the menu as if nothing had changed, as if she wasn't sitting across from the man she had broken. When she saw me, her face softened. She stood up, her hands trembling, and I could see the years of regret written across her features. She had aged not in the lines of her face but in the way her shoulders slumped, as if the weight of her choices had finally caught up with her. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice breaking, "thank you for agreeing to meet me." I sat down across from her, not speaking at first. I didn't need to. The silence between us said everything. The years of separation, the pain of watching her choose Richard over me, the devastation of realizing that the love I had given her had meant nothing in the face of ambition and wealth. She sighed deeply, her hands pressed together on the table, and looked at me with eyes that no longer held the sparkle of the woman I had once known. "I don't even know where to begin," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I waited. I wanted to hear her explanation, to hear the words she thought would make everything better. But inside, I already knew. It wasn't about her. It was about me. "I made a terrible mistake, Thomas," she continued. "I thought I was making the right choice. Richard, he offered me everything I thought I wanted. But I didn't realize until it was too late everything I had with you, everything we built. It was worth more than anything he could give me. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't flinch. The tears were for her, not for me. They weren't enough to fix what had been broken. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice steady. "What do you want from me?" She looked away, as if ashamed of herself. "I don't want anything from you," she said quietly. "I just need you to know that I was wrong, that I lost everything, and I'm sorry for how I treated you, for everything I put you through." I felt the walls closing in, the pressure of the years weighing heavily in that moment. But I wasn't the same man who had stood by her side and forgiven her over and over. I had built something new, and I had done it without her, without any of them, and no apology, no tear-filled confession could change that. I leaned back in my chair, taking a moment to gather my thoughts. "I'm glad you realize your mistakes," I said finally. "But Anna, you chose him, you left me, and I let you go. I thought I was broken then, but I see now that I was never broken. I was just waiting for the right moment to rebuild, and I've done that." She looked at me, her face a mixture of regret and longing. "I never meant to hurt you. I never meant to make you feel like you weren't enough." I stood up slowly, shaking my head. "You didn't hurt me, Anna. You just showed me how much I had to offer, and you showed me that I'm worth more than someone who can walk away without looking back." I turned to leave, but then I stopped, looking back at her one last time. "I don't hate you, Anna. I'm just not the man who needs to be a part of your life anymore." I walked out of the cafe, feeling the weight of the conversation settle into the pit of my stomach. It wasn't closure. It wasn't the apology I had once craved. But it was enough. I had released her, and in doing so, I had released myself. Back at the office, things were progressing faster than I could keep up. The investors I had wooed, the new clients I had signed, the growing reputation of my company, it was all coming together. I looked around the sleek, minimalist office we had built, and realized that everything I had done for me. Not for Anna, not for Richard, but for myself. I had started from the bottom. I had been humiliated, betrayed, discarded, but here I was stronger than ever, building something real, something that would outlast the fleeting power of Richard Lane and the regret of Anna's choices. I wasn't just rebuilding my life, I was redefining it, and no one, not even Anna, could take that from me. The night of the gala arrived, the same gala that had once felt like my life, full of promises, full of pride, but now, standing in the middle of the ballroom, it felt like the last step in a long journey of humiliation and revenge. Tonight, everything would change. I had spent months working behind the scenes, learning, building, and slowly winning the support I needed. My rise wasn't just about taking what was mine, it was about proving that I could be more than the man left behind by Anna and Richard. I had spent so much of my life sacrificing for others, but this time, I was doing it for myself. The moment had come. Tonight, I would show them all who I had become. I arrived early at the venue, slipping past the red carpet, the flashing cameras, and the fake smiles of the city's elite. As I made my way into the grand hall, I could already hear the low murmur of conversations, the clinking of glasses. Richard, the man who had everything I'd ever wanted, stood at the front, surrounded by his loyal followers. His confidence was as obnoxious as ever, but tonight, it wasn't going to be enough. The guests swirled around, mingling and pretending to be excited about the new ventures Richard had created. His power was undeniable, his wealth unquestioned, but as I watched him from across the room, I knew one thing with certainty. His empire was built on lies, and those lies were about to unravel. I waited until the speeches began, until Richard stood at the front of the room with his charming smile and polished words, as if he was the man who held the world in his hands. He talked about vision, about growth, about the future he had so carefully constructed. The investors clapped, hanging on his every word. The press nodded, capturing his image like he was some kind of god. That's when I stepped forward. As I approached the stage, I caught Richard's eye. For a split second, I saw that familiar flash of superiority in his gaze, but it quickly disappeared. His lips curled into a smirk, but the moment felt different now. He wasn't untouchable anymore. "Ladies and gentlemen," I called out, my voice carrying across the room, cutting through Richard's grandiose speech. "I think it's time for the truth to come out." The room fell silent. The investors, the reporters, the guests all turned toward me, their expressions a mix of confusion and curiosity. Richard's face turned pale as I approached the podium, the weight of my presence settling on him like a shadow. "David," he stammered, "what are you doing here?" "I'm here to show the people who you really are," I said, my voice steady, my heart pounding with every word. "You've built your empire on deceit, on lies, and tonight, I'm going to make sure the world knows it." I threw the folder I had been carrying onto the stage. It was filled with evidence, documents, contracts, payments made under the table. I had spent months gathering this, learning every dirty secret that Richard had hidden behind his shiny facade. The documents spilled out in front of everyone, showing how Richard had embezzled money, bribed officials, and used his power to manipulate the very foundation of his company. The crowd gasped. Murmurs spread through the room. Richard's face turned from shock to anger. He scrambled to collect the documents, but the damage was already done. "You think you can get away with this?" Richard sneered, his confidence wavering for the first time in years. "This is slander. I'll have you sued for this." I stepped forward, my eyes never leaving his. "No, Richard, this isn't slander. This is the truth. This is what you've been hiding, and now it's out in the open for everyone to see." For a moment I thought he might lash out, but instead, he turned and walked off the stage, his face flushed with humiliation. The room was in chaos. People whispered, exchanged looks, and pulled out their phones to record the scene. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I didn't need to. I had already won. As I left the gala, my phone buzzed with messages. The investors, the press, the people who had once ignored me, now reaching out, wanting to hear my side of the story. The same people who had written me off were suddenly interested in what I had to say. And then there was Anna. Her message was simple. "We need to talk." I stared at the screen for a long time, her words echoing in my mind. I had already heard everything I needed to hear. She had left me for Richard. She had betrayed me, discarded everything we had for the glitz and glamour of a man who would never truly value her. But I wasn't the man who needed to hear her excuses anymore. The following days were a whirlwind. Richard's company crumbled, faster than I had ever expected. The investors pulled out. The press dug deeper. And soon, Lane Industries was nothing more than a cautionary tale, a name that would fade into the history of failed empires. Meanwhile, I watched as my own company soared. What was once a small idea, a seed planted in the middle of my darkest days, was now thriving. We signed new contracts. We expanded. We grew. The work wasn't always easy, but it was honest. It was mine. And with every step, with every success, I felt the weight of the past fall away. The day came when I stood in my new office, watching the city spread out before me. The same city that had once felt so cold, so out of reach. Now it was mine. The view, the company, the respect, it was all mine. But as I looked out at the skyline, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. I wasn't here to prove anything to Anna. I wasn't here to get revenge on Richard. I was here because I had rebuilt myself. I had learned the most important lesson of all. Success isn't about wealth or status. It's about who you become when everything else falls away. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Anna. This time, I didn't hesitate. I didn't need to answer. I had won. And I had done it on my own terms. It had been months since I had exposed Richard and watched his empire crumble. The echoes of that night still hung in the air, but they were fading, slowly. The world I had once been a part of was now a distant memory, something that felt foreign, as if I had never belonged there at all. Lane Industries had dissolved into nothingness, its assets scattered and sold off. Richard was a shadow now, his name associated with disgrace and fraud, not the power and respect he had once commanded. The fall had been fast, brutal, and deserved. But it hadn't brought me satisfaction the way I thought it would. At first, there had been a rush of adrenaline, a sense of victory when I had stood in front of the crowd, exposing Richard for the fraud he was. When I saw the look of defeat in his eyes as he was dragged away, I had thought that would be the end of it. I thought I would feel a deep sense of closure, that my revenge would fill the emptiness inside me. But it didn't. As I watched the pieces of my life come together, my business growing, my success becoming undeniable, I realized that I wasn't living for revenge anymore. I wasn't climbing this mountain to prove something to anyone, not Richard, not Anna, and not even to the world. I was climbing it for myself. I had built something of my own, something solid, something real. I had transformed my pain into something greater, something that couldn't be taken away by betrayal or deceit. I had found my peace. The day came when I sat across from Martin in my new office, looking out at the city we had both built something out of. It was a surreal moment, one I had pictured many times but never really believed would happen. The company was thriving, the clients were happy, the team was stronger than ever, and we were just getting started. "You did it, Thomas," Martin said, his voice filled with pride. "We did it. This is just the beginning." I smiled, the weight of everything we had been through settling in my chest like a warm, steady presence. "No, Martin," I said, my voice steady. "This is everything I've ever wanted. And it wasn't about the company or the money. It was about proving that I could stand on my own, that I could rise above the wreckage they left behind." Martin nodded. He knew. He had been there from the very beginning, and he had seen the transformation. He had witnessed the late nights, the doubts, the struggle to get back on my feet. But now, we were sitting at the top of the mountain, and I knew, deep down, that I wasn't just standing on it for the view. I was standing on it because I had earned every step. As I sat at my desk later that week, the phone buzzed. I didn't look at it right away. I knew who it was. Anna had been calling again, leaving messages, sending texts, always apologizing, always asking for a chance to explain. But I hadn't responded to her. I didn't want to. I had nothing left to say. She had left me. She had chosen Richard. And in doing so, she had made her choice clear. I was no longer the man she had once known. I wasn't the one who would bend and break to make her feel better. I wasn't the man who would beg for her forgiveness. I had moved on, rebuilt myself, and found a life that was mine. But part of me still hesitated. A small, hidden part that wondered if she had changed, if maybe she had learned from her mistakes, maybe she had seen what I had built, what I had become, and maybe, just maybe, she regretted leaving me. The phone buzzed again. I stared at it for a long moment, my finger hovering over the screen. Finally, I tapped the message open. It was simple. "Thomas, I need to talk. Please. I know I made a mistake. I was wrong. Can we meet?" I read the message again, feeling the old ache stir in my chest. There was a time when I would have dropped everything to hear her words, when I would have begged her to come back. But not anymore. I had built something greater than the pain she had caused. I had learned to stand on my own. I took a deep breath and closed the message without replying. Then, I turned my attention back to the business, back to the life I had worked so hard to build. A week later, I received a letter. A real letter this time, not a message. I opened it slowly, feeling the familiar weight of her handwriting on the envelope. It was a handwritten letter, something she had never done before. "Thomas," it began, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything from you anymore. But I wanted to say that I'm sorry. I don't know if it means anything to you now, but I've never been more regretful of anything in my life. I was blinded by ambition, and I lost everything I had, including you. I thought I was choosing something better, but I was wrong. Please know that I see what you've become, and I admire it. I always have. I just didn't know how to appreciate it at the time." I let the words sit in my hands, the paper warm from where she had held it. It wasn't an apology I needed. It was an apology I had already given myself long ago. I had forgiven her. I had forgiven myself, and in doing so, I had found peace. I folded the letter and placed it in my drawer. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I had learned the greatest lesson of all, that my worth wasn't determined by anyone but myself. A few months later, I stood in front of a crowd of investors, presenting our company's new goals, our plans for the future. The room was full of people who once thought I was nothing, but now looked at me as someone who had built something lasting, someone who had weathered the storm and come out stronger on the other side. I stood there, not with arrogance, but with gratitude. Gratitude for the struggle, for the pain, for the lessons learned along the way. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady, my hands not shaking for the first time in years. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else did." I didn't need to mention Anna. I didn't need to mention Richard. My success was mine. The life I had rebuilt was mine. And as the applause filled the room, I knew that I had finally done what I set out to do. I had risen, not just from the ashes of my marriage, but from the depths of my own despair. I had become the man I was always meant to be.